Our story begins long before the first American troops set foot in Vietnam. We're talking about French Indochina, a colonial possession that included Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia. Imagine a land of stunning beauty, rich resources, and a people yearning for freedom. Enter Ho Chi Minh, a charismatic and enigmatic figure who would become the face of Vietnamese nationalism. French Indochina was a jewel in the crown of the French colonial empire, a region exploited for its rubber, rice, and other valuable resources. The French imposed a system of direct rule, suppressing Vietnamese culture and denying them basic political rights. This exploitation and oppression fueled resentment and resistance among the Vietnamese people, creating fertile ground for nationalist movements to take root. The French colonial administration in Indochina was a complex and often brutal affair. While the French introduced some modern infrastructure and administrative systems, their primary goal was economic exploitation. They sought to extract maximum profit from the region's resources, often at the expense of the local population. This exploitation took many forms, including the forced cultivation of cash crops like rubber, which displaced traditional farming practices and led to food shortages. The French also imposed heavy taxes and tariffs, further burdening the Vietnamese people and limiting their economic opportunities. This systematic economic exploitation created a system of dependency, where the Vietnamese economy was geared towards serving the needs of France rather than the needs of its own people. This economic exploitation was accompanied by a systematic suppression of Vietnamese culture and traditions. The French sought to impose their own language, customs, and institutions, viewing Vietnamese culture as inferior and backward. This cultural suppression further fueled resentment and a sense of national humiliation among the Vietnamese people. The French viewed Vietnamese culture as a threat to their colonial authority. They actively discouraged the use of the Vietnamese language in education and administration, promoting French instead. They also sought to replace traditional Vietnamese customs and social structures with French ones, often through coercive measures. This cultural imperialism was deeply offensive to the Vietnamese, who saw it as an attempt to erase their identity and undermine their national pride. The suppression of Vietnamese culture extended to all aspects of life, from education and religion to art and literature. Vietnamese intellectuals and artists who sought to preserve their cultural heritage were often persecuted or censored. Vietnamese were excluded from positions of authority and subjected to discriminatory laws and practices. This system of racial and political inequality bred deep resentment and a desire for self-determination. The French maintained a rigid social hierarchy, with French citizens at the top and Vietnamese at the bottom. Vietnamese were denied equal access to education, employment, and legal rights. This systemic discrimination created a climate of injustice and fueled the growth of nationalist movements that sought to overthrow French rule and establish an independent Vietnamese state. The French colonial system was based on the principle of racial superiority, with French citizens enjoying privileges and rights that were denied to the Vietnamese. This racial discrimination was enshrined in law and enforced through a system of segregation and unequal treatment. Vietnamese were barred from holding high-ranking positions in the government, the military, and the economy. They were also subjected to a separate and unequal legal system, where they could be punished more harshly than French citizens for the same crimes. This pervasive system of discrimination created a deep sense of alienation and resentment among the Vietnamese population, fueling their desire for fundamental change. Ho Chi Minh, a revolutionary who traveled the world, was inspired by communist ideology and dedicated his life to liberating Vietnam from French rule. He was a complex and enigmatic figure, a master strategist and a skilled propagandist. He spent decades in exile, traveling to France, the Soviet Union, and China, where he studied revolutionary theory and honed his political skills. He adopted the name Ho Chi Minh, meaning "he who enlightens," as a symbol of his commitment to Vietnamese independence. Ho Chi Minh's early life was marked by hardship and a deep sense of injustice. He witnessed firsthand the poverty and oppression of his people under French colonial rule, which fueled his desire for change. His travels abroad exposed him to new ideas and revolutionary movements, shaping his ideology and tactics. He became a skilled organizer and communicator, able to rally support for his cause both within Vietnam and internationally. Ho Chi Minh's travels took him to the heart of the burgeoning communist movement in the early 20th century. He became a skilled organizer and communicator, able to rally support for his cause both within Vietnam and internationally. Ho Chi Minh's travels took him to the heart of the burgeoning communist movement in the early 20th century. He was deeply influenced by the writings of Marx, Lenin, and other revolutionary thinkers, and he saw communism as a way to achieve both national liberation and social justice for his people. His time in the Soviet Union exposed him to the successes and failures of the Bolshevik Revolution, providing him with valuable lessons in revolutionary strategy and tactics. In China, he learned from the experiences of the Chinese Communist Party's long and arduous struggle against both foreign invaders and domestic reactionaries. These experiences shaped his worldview and solidified his commitment to a revolutionary path for Vietnam. Ho Chi Minh's ideology was a blend of Marxism, Leninism, and Vietnamese nationalism. He saw communism as the path to achieving national liberation and social justice for his people. He believed that only a socialist state could break the chains of colonialism and create a truly independent and prosperous Vietnam. However, his nationalism was equally important. He saw himself as a Vietnamese patriot, fighting to liberate his country from foreign domination and restore its national pride. This blend of ideologies made him a unique and powerful leader, able to unite diverse groups of Vietnamese people under a common banner. Ho Chi Minh was not simply a dogmatic follower of communist doctrine. He adapted Marxist-Leninist principles to the specific conditions of Vietnam, incorporating elements of Vietnamese culture and traditions into his ideology. He emphasized the importance of national unity and self-reliance, appealing to the deep-seated patriotism of the Vietnamese people. His vision of a future Vietnam was one where the country was both independent and socialist, where the benefits of economic development were shared equally among all citizens. This vision resonated strongly with the Vietnamese peasantry, who had long suffered under the yoke of both foreign colonialism and domestic feudalism. He formed the Viet Minh, a coalition of nationalist groups that fought against the French colonial forces. The Viet Minh was a broad coalition, uniting communists, nationalists, and peasants under the common goal of independence. They employed guerrilla warfare tactics, fighting a protracted and determined struggle against the better-equipped French army. The Viet Minh was not a monolithic organization, but rather a complex and diverse coalition. It included not only communists but also nationalists, intellectuals, religious leaders, and peasants. This broad base of support gave the Viet Minh its strength and resilience. They were able to effectively mobilize the Vietnamese population against the French, using a combination of political organizing, propaganda, and armed struggle. The Viet Minh's organizational structure was highly effective, allowing them to operate both in the cities and in the countryside. They established a network of secret cells and underground networks, which allowed them to coordinate their activities and evade French surveillance. They also created a sophisticated propaganda apparatus, using leaflets, newspapers, and radio broadcasts to spread their message and mobilize support. The Viet Minh's ability to combine political organizing with armed struggle made them a formidable force, capable of challenging the French colonial regime on multiple fronts. The Viet Minh's guerrilla warfare tactics were crucial to their success against the French. They avoided direct confrontations with the French army whenever possible, instead relying on ambushes, sabotage, and hit-and-run attacks. They used their knowledge of the terrain to their advantage, operating from hidden bases in the jungle and relying on the support of the local population. This protracted and determined struggle gradually wore down the French, both militarily and politically. The Viet Minh's guerrilla tactics were highly effective in neutralizing the French army's superior firepower. They used the dense jungle and mountainous terrain of Vietnam to their advantage, launching surprise attacks and then melting back into the countryside. They also relied heavily on the support of the local population, who provided them with food, shelter, and intelligence. This protracted war of attrition gradually wore down the French, who found themselves fighting an enemy they could not easily defeat. The Viet Minh's resilience and determination, combined with their effective use of guerrilla warfare, ultimately proved to be decisive in their struggle for independence. The struggle for independence was long and brutal, marked by guerrilla warfare and fierce determination. The Vietnamese landscape, with its dense jungles and mountainous terrain, provided ideal conditions for guerrilla warfare. The Viet Minh used their knowledge of the terrain to their advantage, launching surprise attacks and ambushes against the French. The war was marked by atrocities on both sides, as the French used brutal tactics to try to suppress the rebellion, and the Viet Minh employed tactics such as assassination and sabotage. The war for Vietnamese independence was a long and bloody conflict, lasting for nearly a decade. It was a war fought not only on the battlefield but also in the villages and cities of Vietnam, where the Viet Minh sought to win the hearts and minds of the people. Both sides committed atrocities, as the French used tactics such as torture, summary executions, and the bombing of civilian areas to try to break the Viet Minh's resistance. The Viet Minh, in turn, employed tactics such as assassination of French officials and collaborators, as well as sabotage of French infrastructure. This brutal and protracted conflict left a deep scar on Vietnamese society, and its legacy continues to be felt today. The climax of this phase was the Battle of Dien Bien Phu in 1954. The Viet Minh, against all odds, defeated the French army in a decisive victory that sent shockwaves around the world. Dien Bien Phu was a remote mountain outpost where the French had hoped to lure the Viet Minh into a conventional battle. However, the Viet Minh, under the command of General Vo Nguyen Giap, surrounded the French forces and subjected them to a relentless siege. The battle lasted for 56 days and ended in a humiliating defeat for the French, marking the end of French colonial rule in Indochina. The Battle of Dien Bien Phu was a military masterpiece, a testament to the Viet Minh's strategic brilliance and determination. General Giap, a former history teacher, outmaneuvered the French at every turn, using innovative tactics and logistics to overcome their superior firepower. The Viet Minh's victory at Dien Bien Phu was a watershed moment in the history of decolonization, demonstrating that even a small, determined force could defeat a major colonial power. The Viet Minh's victory at Dien Bien Phu was a watershed moment in the history of decolonization, demonstrating that even a small, determined force could defeat a major colonial power. The French military, confident in their superior firepower and technology, believed they could easily defeat the Viet Minh in a conventional battle. However, General Giap, a brilliant military strategist, turned the tables on them, using innovative tactics and logistics to surround and besiege the French forces. The Viet Minh transported heavy artillery through the jungle, a feat the French deemed impossible, and used it to bombard the French positions. The French, trapped and isolated, were eventually forced to surrender, marking a stunning and unexpected victory for the Viet Minh. It was a David and Goliath story on a grand scale, a testament to the power of national liberation movements. The victory at Dien Bien Phu demonstrated that even a small, determined force could defeat a larger, more powerful adversary. It inspired other anti-colonial movements around the world and marked a turning point in the history of decolonization. The French, after decades of colonial rule, were forced to withdraw, leaving a power vacuum in Vietnam. The defeat at Dien Bien Phu shattered French morale and political will, leading to their withdrawal from Indochina. This victory inspired anti-colonial movements across Africa, Asia, and Latin America, accelerating the process of decolonization and reshaping the global political landscape. The victory at Dien Bien Phu sent shockwaves throughout the colonial world, demonstrating that European powers were not invincible and that colonized peoples could successfully resist foreign domination. It emboldened nationalist movements in other countries, leading to a wave of independence movements that swept across the globe in the decades that followed. The legacy of Dien Bien Phu continues to resonate today, serving as a reminder of the power of resistance and the importance of self-determination. But this wasn't the end. It was merely the beginning of a new chapter in the unfolding mystery. The Geneva Accords, signed in the aftermath of Dien Bien Phu, divided Vietnam into North and South, setting the stage for further conflict and the eventual involvement of the United States. The Geneva Accords, while intended to bring peace, ultimately created a divided Vietnam, with a communist North and a non-communist South. This division was meant to be temporary, with elections scheduled to reunify the country. However, these elections never took place, leading to a protracted and bloody conflict that would draw in the United States and have profound consequences for the world. The Geneva Accords reflected the complex geopolitical realities of the time, with the Cold War superpowers vying for influence in Southeast Asia. The division of Vietnam was seen as a compromise, a way to prevent a wider war between communist and anti-communist forces. However, this compromise proved to be unsustainable, as both North and South Vietnam sought to reunify the country under their own rule. The failure to hold the scheduled elections further exacerbated tensions, creating a political vacuum that would eventually be filled by armed conflict. Was Ho Chi Minh a dedicated nationalist or a communist puppet? What were his true motivations, and how did his ideology shape the course of the war? This question has been debated for decades. Some historians argue that Ho Chi Minh was primarily a nationalist, using communist ideology as a means to achieve Vietnamese independence. Others contend that he was a committed communist who sought to establish a socialist state in Vietnam. The truth is likely a combination of both. Ho Chi Minh was a complex figure whose ideology evolved over time, shaped by his experiences and the changing geopolitical landscape. He was driven by a deep love for his country and a desire to see it free from foreign domination. But he also believed that communism offered the best path to achieving social justice and economic equality for the Vietnamese people. His legacy remains a subject of intense debate, but his role as a pivotal figure in Vietnamese history is undeniable. Ho Chi Minh's ideology was not static, but rather evolved over time, influenced by the changing circumstances in Vietnam and the global political landscape. While he was deeply committed to Vietnamese independence, he also believed that socialism offered the best path to achieving economic development and social progress. His ability to synthesize these two seemingly disparate ideologies, nationalism and communism, allowed him to unite a diverse range of Vietnamese people under a common banner and lead them in their struggle against foreign domination. His legacy continues to be debated and reinterpreted, but his place as a central figure in the history of modern Vietnam is secure.